The stars were all around him as Reinhold descended the little hill. Out at sea, the forestall was still sweeping the water with her fingers of light, while further along the beach, the scaffolding around the Columbus had transformed itself into an illuminated Christmas tree. Only the projecting prow of the ship lay like a dark shadow across the stars. A radio was blaring dance music from the living quarters, and unconsciously Reinhold's feet accelerated to the rhythm. He had almost reached the narrow road along the edge of the sands when some premonition, some half-glimpsed movement made him stop. Puzzled, he glanced from land to sea and back again. It was some little time before he thought of looking at the sky. Then Reinhold Hoffmann knew, as did Conrad Schneider at the same moment, that he had lost his race. And he knew that he had lost it, not by the few weeks or months that he had feared, but by millennia. The huge and silent shadows driving across the stars, more miles above his head than he dared to guess, were as far beyond his little Columbus as it surpassed the log canoes of Paleolithic man. For a moment that seemed to last forever, Reinhold watched, as all the world was watching, while the great ships descended in their overwhelming majesty, until at last he could hear the faint scream of their passage through the thin air of the stratosphere. He felt no regrets as the work of a lifetime was swept away. He had labored to take man to the stars, and in the moment of success, the stars, the aloof, indifferent stars, had come to him. This was the moment when history held its breath, and the present sheared asunder from the past, as an iceberg splits from its frozen parent cliffs and goes sailing out to sea in lonely pride. All that the past ages had achieved was as nothing now. Only one thought echoed and re-echoed through Reinhold's brain. The human race was no longer alone. For a moment, Stormgren was silent, his mind going back into the past. He was not surprised that the secret had been discovered. Indeed, it was surprising that it had been kept so long. He rose to his feet and began to walk back along the jetty, the reporter following a few paces behind. The story, he said, contains a certain amount of truth. On my last visit to Karelin's ship, I took some apparatus with me, in the hope that I might be able to see the supervisor. It was rather a foolish thing to do, but, well, I was only 60 at the time. He chuckled to himself and then continued. It's not much of a story to have brought you all this way. You see, it didn't work. You saw nothing? No, nothing at all. I'm afraid you'll have to wait. But after all, there are only 20 years to go. 20 years to go. Yes, Karelin had been right. By then the world would be ready, as it had not been when he had spoken that same lie to Duval 30 years ago. Karelin had trusted him, and Stormgren had not betrayed his faith. He was as sure as he could be of anything that the supervisor had known his plan from the beginning, and had foreseen every moment of its final act. Why else had that enormous chair been already empty when the circle of light blazed upon it? In the same moment he had started to swing the beam, fearing that he was too late. The metal door, twice as high as a man, was closing swiftly when he first caught sight of it. Closing swiftly, yet not quite swiftly enough. Yes, Karelin had trusted him, had not wished him to go down into the long evening of his life, haunted by a mystery he could never solve. Karelin dared not defy the unknown powers above him. Were they of that same race also? But he had done all that he could. If he had disobeyed them, they could never prove it. It was a final proof, Stormgren knew, of Karelin's affection for him. Though it might be the affection of a man for a devoted and intelligent dog, it was none the less sincere for that, and Stormgren's life had given him few greater satisfactions. We have had our failures. Yes, Karelin, that was true. And were you the one who failed before the dawn of human history? It must have been a failure indeed, thought Stormgren, for its echoes to roll down all the ages, to haunt the childhood of every race of man. Even in 50 years, could you overcome the power of all the myths and legends of the world? Yet Stormgren knew that there would be no second failure. When the two races met again, the overlords would have won the trust and friendship of mankind, and not even the shock of recognition could undo that work. They would go together into the future, and the unknown tragedy that must have darkened the past would be lost forever down the dim corridors of prehistoric time. And Stormgren hoped that when Corellin was free to walk once more on Earth, he would one day come to these northern forests and stand beside the grave of the first man ever to be his friend. "This is the day," whispered the radios in 100 tongues. "This is the day," said the headlines of 1,000 newspapers. "This is the day," thought the cameramen as they checked and rechecked the equipment gathered around the vast empty space upon which Corellin's ship would be descending. "The ship is moving," came the word, flashed instantly to every corner of the planet. "It is heading westward." At less than 1,000 kilometers an hour, falling slowly down from the empty heights of the stratosphere, the ship moved out to the Great Plains and to its second rendezvous with history. It settled down obediently before the waiting cameras and the packed thousands of spectators, so few of whom could see as much as the millions gathered round their TV sets. The ground should have cracked and trembled beneath that tremendous weight, but the vessel was still in the grip of whatever forces drove it among the stars. It kissed the earth as gently as a falling snowflake. The curving wall 20 meters above the ground seemed to flow and shimmer. Where there had been a smooth and shining surface, a great opening had appeared. Nothing was visible in it, even to the questing eyes of the camera. It was as dark and shadowed as the entrance to a cave. Out of the orifice, a wide, glittering gangway extruded itself and drove purposefully towards the ground. The world was watching that dark portal within which nothing had yet stirred. Then the seldom heard, yet unforgettable voice of Corellin floated softly down from some hidden source. His message could scarcely have been more unexpected. "There are some children by the foot of the gangway. I would like 2 of them to come up and meet me." There was silence for a moment. Then a boy and a girl broke from the crowd and walked, with complete lack of self-consciousness, towards the gangway and into history. Others followed, but Stop and Corellin's chuckle came from the ship. 2 will be enough. Eagerly anticipating the adventure, the children, they could not have been more than 6 years old, jumped onto the metal slide. Waving cheerfully to the crowds beneath and to their anxious parents who, too late, had probably remembered the legend of the Pied Piper, the children ascended the slope and disappeared into the ship. A vast silence lay over the whole world for the space of 20 seconds, though afterward no one could believe the time had been so short. Then the darkness of the great opening seemed to move forward, and Corellin came forth into the sunlight. The boy was sitting on his left arm, the girl on his right. They were both too busy playing with Corellin's wings to take any notice of the watching multitude. It was a tribute to the overlord's psychology and their careful years of preparation that only a few people fainted. Yet there could have been fewer still anywhere in the world who did not feel the ancient terror brush for an awful instant against their minds before reason banished it forever. There was no mistake. The leathery wings, the little horns, the barbed tail, all were there. The most terrible of all legends had come to life out of the unknown past. Yet now it stood smiling in ebon majesty, with the sunlight gleaming upon its tremendous body, and with a human child resting trustfully on either arm. The rising moon was beginning to paint the eastern sky with a pale milky glow. Up there, Jan knew, was the main base of the overlords, lying within the ramparts of Plato. Though the supply ships must have been coming and going for more than 70 years, it was only in Jan's lifetime that all concealment had been dropped, and they had made their departure in clear sight of Earth. In the 200-inch telescope, the shadows of the great ships could be clearly seen when the morning or evening sun cast them for miles across the lunar plains. Since everything that the overlords did was of immense interest to mankind, a careful watch was kept of their comings and goings, and the pattern of their behavior was beginning to emerge. One of those great shadows had vanished a few hours ago. That meant, Jan knew, that somewhere off the moon, an overlord ship was lying in space, carrying out whatever routine was necessary before it began its journey to its distant, unknown home. He had never seen one of those returning ships launch itself towards the stars. If conditions were good, the sight was visible over half the world, but Jan had always been unlucky. One could never tell exactly when the takeoff would be, and the overlords did not advertise the fact. He decided he would wait another 10 minutes, then rejoin the party. What was that? Only a meteor sliding down through Eridanus. Jan relaxed, discovered his cigarette had gone out, and lit another. He was halfway through it when, 500,000 kilometers away, the star drive went on. Up from the heart of the spreading moon glow, a tiny spark began to climb towards the zenith. At first its movement was so slow that it could hardly be perceived, but second by second it was gaining speed. As it climbed, it increased in brilliance, then suddenly faded from sight. A moment later it had reappeared, gaining speed and brightness. Waxing and waning with a peculiar rhythm, it ascended ever more swiftly into the sky, drawing a fluctuating line of light across the stars. Even if one did not know its real distance, the impression of speed was breathtaking. When one knew that the departing ship was somewhere beyond the moon, the mind reeled at the speeds and energies involved. It was an unimportant byproduct of those energies, Jan knew, that he was seeing now. The ship itself was invisible, already far ahead of that ascending light. As a high-flying jet may leave a vapor trail behind it, so the outward-bound vessel of the overlords left its own peculiar wake. The generally accepted theory, and there seemed little doubt of its truth, was that the immense accelerations of the star drive caused the local distortion of space. What Jan was seeing, he knew, was nothing less than the light of distant stars, collected and focused into his eye whenever conditions were favorable along the track of the ship. It was a visible proof of relativity, the bending of light in the presence of a colossal gravitational field. Now the end of that vast, pencil-thin lens seemed to be moving more slowly, but that was only due to perspective. In reality, the ship was still gaining speed. Its path was merely being foreshortened as it hurled itself towards the stars. There would be many telescopes following it, Jan knew, as Earth scientists tried to uncover the secrets of the drive. The phantom light was beginning to wane. Now it was a fading streak, pointing to the heart of the constellation Carina, as Jan had known that it would. The home of the overlords was somewhere out there, but it might circle any one of 1,000 stars in that sector of space. There was no way of telling its distance from the solar system. It was all over. Though the ship had scarcely begun its journey, there was nothing more that human eyes could see. But in Jan's mind, the memory of that shining path still burned, a beacon that would never fade as long as he possessed ambition and desire. Karelin paused, and the silence grew even deeper. There has been some complaint among the younger and more romantic elements of your population because outer space has been closed to you. We had a purpose in doing this. We do not impose bans for the pleasure of it. But have you ever stopped to consider, if you will excuse a slightly unflattering analogy, what a man from your Stone Age would have felt if he had suddenly found himself in a modern city? Surely, protested the Herald Tribune, there is a fundamental difference. We are accustomed to science. On your world, there are doubtless many things which we might not understand, but they wouldn't seem magic to us. Are you quite sure of that? Said Karelin, so softly that it was hard to hear his words. Only 100 years lies between the age of electricity and the age of steam. But what would a Victorian engineer have made of a television set or an electronic computer? And how long would he have lived if he had started to investigate their workings? The gulf between two technologies can easily become so great that it is lethal. Hello, whispered Reuters to the BBC. We're in luck. He's going to make a major policy statement. I know the symptoms. And there are other reasons why we have restricted the human race to Earth. Watch. The lights dimmed and vanished. As they faded, A milky opalescence formed in the center of the room. It congealed into a whirlpool of stars, a spiral nebula seen from a point far beyond its outermost sun. No human eyes have ever seen this sight before, said Corellian's voice from the darkness. You are looking at your own universe, the island galaxy of which your sun is a member, from a distance of 500,000 light years. There was a long silence. Then Corellian continued, and now his voice held something that was not quite pity and not precisely scorn. Your race has shown a notable incapacity for dealing with the problems of its own rather small planet. When we arrived, you were on the point of destroying yourselves with the powers that science had rashly given you. Without our intervention, the Earth today would be a radioactive wilderness. Now you have a world at peace and a united race. Soon you will be sufficiently civilized to run your planet without our assistance. Perhaps you could eventually handle the problems of an entire solar system, say 50 moons and planets. But do you really imagine that you could ever cope with this? The nebula expanded. Now the individual stars were rushing past, appearing and vanishing as swiftly as sparks from a forge. And each of those transient sparks was a sun, with who knew how many circling worlds. In this galaxy of ours, murmured Corellian, there are 87,000 million suns. Even that figure gives only a faint idea of the immensity of space. In challenging it, you would be like ants attempting to label and classify all the grains of sand in all the deserts of the world. Your race, in its present stage of evolution, cannot face that stupendous challenge. One of my duties has been to protect you from the powers and forces that lie among the stars, forces beyond anything that you can ever imagine. The image of the galaxy's swirling fire mists faded. Light returned to the sudden silence of the great chamber. Corellian turned to go. The audience was over. At the door he paused and looked back upon the hushed crowd. It is a bitter thought, but you must face it. The planets you may one day possess, but the stars are not for man. The stars are not for man. Yes, it would annoy them to have the celestial portals slammed in their faces, but they must learn to face the truth, or as much of the truth as could mercifully be given to them. From the lonely heights of the stratosphere, Corellian looked down upon the world and the people that had been given into his reluctant keeping. He thought of all that lay ahead and what this world would be only a dozen years from now. They would never know how lucky they had been. For a lifetime, mankind had achieved as much happiness as any race can ever know. It had been the golden age. But gold was also the color of sunset, of autumn, and only Corellian's ears could catch the first wailings of the winter storms. And only Corellian knew with what inexorable swiftness the golden age was rushing to its close. For almost 100 years, the stresses had been slowly increasing here in the burning darkness deep beneath the ocean's floor. Though the submarine canyon had been formed geological ages ago, the tortured rocks had never reconciled themselves to their new positions. Countless times the strata had creaked and shifted as the unimaginable weight of water disturbed their precarious equilibrium. They were ready to move again. Jeff was exploring the rock pools along the narrow beach, an occupation he found endlessly absorbing. One never knew what exotic creatures one might find, sheltered here from the waves that march forever across the Pacific to spend themselves against the reef. It was a fairyland for any child, and for the moment he possessed it all himself, for his friends had gone up into the hills. The day was quiet and peaceful. There was not a breath of wind, and even the perpetual muttering beyond the reef had sunk to a sullen undertone. A blazing sun hung halfway down the sky, but Jeff's mahogany brown body was now quite immune to its onslaughts. Very firmly, something took hold of the beach and gave it a single, sudden jerk. The tremor passed so swiftly that Jeff wondered if he had imagined it. Perhaps it was a momentary giddiness, for all around him remained utterly unchanged. The waters of the lagoon were unruffled, the sky empty of cloud or menace. And then a very strange thing began to happen. Swifter than any tide could ebb, the water was receding from the shore. Jeff watched, deeply puzzled and not in the least afraid, as the wet sands were uncovered and lay sparkling in the sun. He followed the retreating ocean, determined to make the most of whatever miracle had opened up the underwater world for his inspection. Now the level had sunk so far that the broken mast of the old wreck was climbing into the air, its weeds hanging limply from it as they lost their liquid support. Jeff hastened forward, eager to see what wonders would be uncovered next. It was then that he noticed a sound from the reef. He had never heard anything like it before, and he stopped to think the matter over, his bare feet slowly sinking into the moist sand. A great fish was thrashing in its death agonies a few meters away, but Jeff scarcely noticed it. He stood, alert and listening, while the noise from the reef grew steadily around him. It was a sucking, gurgling sound, as of a river racing through a narrow channel. It was the voice of the reluctantly retreating sea, angry at losing, even for a moment, the lands it rightfully possessed. Through the graceful branches of the coral, through the hidden submarine caves, millions of tons of water were draining out of the lagoon into the vastness of the Pacific. Very soon, and very swiftly, they would return. To Jeff, it was only a game. It had not yet begun to frighten him. A dream was merely a dream, no matter how strange it might be. He was no longer lonely in the worlds that sleep opened up to him. Only on that first night had his mind called out to Jean across whatever unknown gulfs had sundered them. Now he went alone and fearless into the universe that was opening up before him. In the mornings they would question him, and he would tell what he could remember. Sometimes his words stumbled and failed as he tried to describe scenes which were clearly not only beyond all his experience, but beyond the imagination of man. They would prompt him with new words, show him pictures and colors to refresh his memory, then build up what pattern they could from his replies. Often they could make nothing of the result, though it seemed that in Jeff's own mind his dream worlds were perfectly plain and sharp. He was simply unable to communicate them to his parents. Yet some were clear enough. Space, no planet, no surrounding landscape, no world underfoot, only the stars in the velvet night, and hanging against them a great red sun that was beating like a heart. Huge and tenuous at one moment, it would slowly shrink, brightening at the same time as if new fuel was being fed to its internal fires. It would climb the spectrum and hover at the edge of yellow, and then the cycle would reverse itself. The star would expand and cool, becoming once more a ragged, flame-red cloud. Typical pulsating variable, said Chevrolet eagerly. Seen, too, under tremendous time acceleration. I can't identify it precisely, but the nearest star that fits the description is Ramchandran 9, or it may be Pharanodon 12. Whichever it is, replied Karelin, he's getting further away from home. Much further, said Reshevrik. It might have been Earth. A white sun hung in a blue sky flecked with clouds, which were racing before a storm. A hill sloped gently down to an ocean torn into spray by the ravening wind. Yet nothing moved. The scene was frozen, as if glimpsed in a flash of lightning. And far, far away on the horizon was something that was not of Earth, a line of misty columns, tapering slightly as they soared out of the sea and lost themselves among the clouds. They were spaced with perfect precision along the rim of the planet, too huge to be artificial, yet too regular to be natural. Caedmon 4 and the Pillars of the Dawn, said Reshevrik, and there was awe in his voice. He has reached the center of the universe, and he has scarcely begun his journey, answered Karelin. The planet was absolutely flat. Its enormous gravity had long ago crushed into one uniform level the mountains of its Faraday youth, mountains whose mightiest peaks had never exceeded a few meters in height. Yet there was life here, for the surface was covered with a myriad geometrical patterns that crawled and moved and changed their color. It was a world of 2 dimensions, inhabited by beings who could not be more than a fraction of a centimeter in thickness. And in its sky was such a sun as no opium eater could have imagined in his wildest dreams. Too hot to be white, it was a searing ghost at the frontiers of the ultraviolet, burning its planets with radiations which would be instantly lethal to all earthly forms of life. For millions of kilometers around extended great veils of gas and dust, fluorescing in countless colors as the blasts of ultraviolet tore through them. It was a star against which Earth's pale sun would have been as feeble as a glowworm at noon. Hexanarax 2, and nowhere else in the known universe, said Rashavarac. Only a handful of our ships has ever reached it, and they have never risked any landings. For who would have thought that life could exist on such planets? It seems, said Corallin, that you scientists have not been as thorough as you had believed. If those patterns are intelligent, the problem of communication will be interesting. I wonder if they have any knowledge of the third dimension. It was a world that could never know the meaning of night and day, of years or seasons. 6 colored suns shared its sky, so that there came only a change of light, never darkness. Through the clash and tug of conflicting gravitational fields, the planet traveled along the loops and curves of its inconceivably complex orbit, never retracing the same path. Every moment was unique. The configuration which the 6 suns now held in its heavens would not repeat itself this side of eternity. And even here there was life. Though the planet might be scorched by the central fires in one age and frozen in the outer reaches in another, it was yet the home of intelligence. The great, many-faceted crystals stood grouped in intricate geometrical patterns, motionless in the ears of cold, growing slowly along the veins of mineral when the world was warm again. No matter if it took 1,000 years for them to complete a thought. The universe was still young, and time stretched endlessly before them. I have searched all our records, said Rashavarac. We have no knowledge of such a world, or such a combination of suns. If it existed inside our universe, the astronomers would have detected it, even if it lay beyond the range of our ships. Then he has left the galaxy. Yes. Surely it cannot be much longer now. Who knows? He is only dreaming. When he awakes, he is still the same. It is merely the first phase. We will know soon enough when the change begins. What has started this thing? Asked George. And where is it going to lead? That is something we cannot answer. But there are many races in the universe, and some of them discovered these powers long before your species, or mine, appeared on the scene. They have been waiting for you to join them, and now the time has come. Then where do you come into this picture? Probably, like most men, you have always regarded us as your masters. That is not true. We've never been more than guardians, doing a duty imposed upon us from above. That duty is hard to define. Perhaps you can best think of us as midwives, attending a difficult birth. We are helping to bring something new and wonderful into being. Rashavarac hesitated. For a moment, it almost seemed as if he was at a loss for words. Yes, we are the midwives, but we ourselves are barren. In that instant, George knew that he was in the presence of a tragedy transcending his own. It was incredible, yet somehow just. Despite all their powers and their brilliance, the overlords were trapped in some evolutionary cul-de-sac. Here was a great and noble race, in almost every way superior to mankind. It had had no future, and it was aware of it. In the face of this, George's own problems seemed suddenly trivial. Now I know, he said, why you have been watching Geoffrey. He was the guinea pig in this experiment. Exactly, though the experiment was beyond our control. We did not start it. We were merely trying to observe. We did not interfere, except when we had to. Yes, thought George, the tidal wave. It would never do to let a valuable specimen be destroyed. Then he felt ashamed of himself. Such bitterness was unworthy. I've only one more question, he said. What shall we do about our children? Enjoy them while you may, answered Rasheverek gently. They will not be yours for long. It was advice that might have been given to any parent in any age, but now it contained a threat and a terror it had never held before. My work here is nearly ended, said Karelin's voice from a million radios. At last, after 100 years, I can tell you what it was. A century ago, we came to your world and saved you from self-destruction. I do not believe that anyone would deny that fact. But what that self-destruction was, you never guessed. Many worlds have come to the crossroads of nuclear power, have avoided disaster, have gone on to build peaceful and happy civilizations, and have then been utterly destroyed by forces of which they knew nothing. In the 20th century, you first began to tamper seriously with those forces. That was why it became necessary to act. All through that century, the human race was drawing slowly nearer to the abyss, never even suspecting its existence. Across that abyss, there is only one bridge. Few races, unaided, have ever found it. Some have turned back while there was still time, avoiding both the danger and the achievement. Their worlds have become Elysian islands of effortless content, playing no further part in the story of the universe. That would never have been your fate or your fortune. Your race was too vital for that. It would have plunged into ruin and taken others with it, for you would never have found that bridge. In the centuries before our coming, your scientists uncovered the secrets of the physical world and led you from the energy of steam to the energy of the atom. You had put superstition behind you. Science was the only real religion of mankind. It was a gift of the Western minority to the remainder of mankind, and it had destroyed all other faiths. Those that still existed when we came were already dying. Science, it was felt, could explain everything. There were no forces which did not come within its scope, no events for which it could not ultimately account. The origin of the universe might be forever unknown, but all that had happened since obeyed the laws of physics. Yet your mystics, though they were lost in their own delusions, had seen part of the truth. There are powers of the mind and powers beyond the mind, which your science could never have brought within its framework without shattering it entirely. All down the ages there have been countless reports of strange phenomena, poltergeists, telepathy, precognition, which you had named but never explained. At first, science ignored them, even denied their existence, despite the testimony of 5,000 years. But they exist, and if it is to be complete, any theory of the universe must account for them. During the first half of the 20th century, a few of your scientists began to investigate these matters. They did not know it, but they were tampering with the locks of Pandora's box. The forces they might have unleashed transcended any pearls that the atom could have brought. For the physicists could only have ruined the Earth. The paraphysicists could have spread havoc to the stars. We held the clock back. We made you mark time while those powers developed, until they could come flooding out into the channels that were being prepared for them. We are your guardians, no more. As we are above you, so there is something above us, using us for its own purposes. Again and again we have received our orders, have gone to some world in the early flower of its civilization, and have guided it along the road that we can never follow, the road that you are traveling now. In a few years, it will all be over, and the human race will have divided in twain. There is no way back, and no future for the world you know. All the hopes and dreams of your race are ended now. You have given birth to your successors, and it is your tragedy that you will never understand them, will never even be able to communicate with their minds. Indeed, they will not possess minds as you know them. They will be a single entity, as you yourselves are the sums of your myriad cells. You will not think them human, and you will be right. In a few hours, the crisis will be upon us. My task and my duty is to protect those I have been sent here to guard. Despite their awakening powers, they could be destroyed by the multitudes around them. Yes, even by their parents, when they realize the truth. I must take them away and isolate them, for their protection and for yours. Tomorrow my ships will begin the evacuation. I shall not blame you if you try to interfere, but it will be useless. Greater powers than mine are awakening now. I am only one of their instruments. And then, what am I to do with you, the survivors, when your purpose has been fulfilled? It would be simplest and perhaps most merciful to destroy you, as you yourselves would destroy a mortally wounded pet you loved. But this I cannot do. Your future will be your own to choose in the years that are left to you. It is my hope that humanity will go to its rest in peace, knowing that it has not lived in vain. For what you would have brought into the world may be utterly alien. It may share none of your desires or hopes. It may look upon your greatest achievements as childish toys, as it is something wonderful, and you will have created it. When our race is forgotten, part of yours will still exist. Do not, therefore, condemn us for what we were compelled to do. And remember this, we shall always envy you. No one was supposed to know when the time would be. Yet Jean woke in the stillness of the night and lay for a moment staring at the ghostly glimmer from the ceiling. Then she reached out to grasp George's hand. He was a sound sleeper, but this time he woke at once. They did not speak, for the words that were wanted did not exist. Jean was no longer frightened or even sad. She had come through to the calm waters and was beyond emotion now. But there was one thing still to be done, and she knew that there was barely time to do it. Still without a word, George followed her through the silent house. They went across the patch of moonlight that had entered through the studio roof, moving as quietly as the shadows it cast, until they came to the deserted nursery. Nothing had been changed. The fluoro patterns that George had painted so carefully still glowed on the walls, and the rattle that had once belonged to Jennifer Ann still lay where she had dropped it when her mind turned into the unknowable remoteness it inhabited now. She has left her toys behind, thought George, but ours go hence with us. He thought of the royal children of the pharaohs, whose dolls and beads had been buried with them 5,000 years ago. So it would be again. No one else, he told himself, will ever love our treasures. We will take them with us, and will not part with them. Slowly, Jean turned towards him and rested her head upon his shoulder. He clasped his arms about her waist, and the love he had once known came back to him, faint yet clear, like an echo from a distant range of hills. It was too late now to say all that was due to her, and the regrets he felt were less for his deceits than for his past indifference. Then Jean said quietly, "Goodbye, my darling," and tightened her arms about him. There was no time for George to answer, but even at that final moment, he felt a brief astonishment as he wondered how she knew that the moment had arrived. Far down in the rock, the segments of uranium began to rush together, seeking the union they could never achieve. And the island rose to meet the dawn. The glare of the star drive dwindled and died, somewhere out there beyond the orbit of Mars. Along that road, thought Jan, he alone had traveled, out of all the billions of human beings who had lived and died on Earth. And no one would ever travel it again. The world was his. Everything he needed, all the material possessions anyone could ever desire, were his for the taking. But he was no longer interested. He feared neither the loneliness of the deserted planet, nor the presence that still rested here in the last moments before it went to seek its unknown heritage. In the inconceivable backwash of that departure, Jan did not expect that he and his problems would long survive. That was well. He had done all that he wished to do, and to drag out a pointless life on this empty world would have been an unbearable anticlimax. He could have left with the overlords, but for what purpose? For he knew, as no one else had ever known, that Karelin spoke the truth when he had said, "The stars are not for man." He turned his back upon the night and walked through the vast entrance of the Overlord base. Its size affected him not in the least. Sheer immensity no longer had any power over his mind. The lights were burning redly, driven by energies that would feed them for ages yet. On either side lay machines whose secrets he would never know, abandoned by the overlords in their retreat. He went past them and clambered awkwardly up the great steps until he had reached the control room. The spirit of the overlords still lingered here. Their machines were still alive, doing the bidding of their now far-distant masters. What could he add, wondered Jan, to the information they were already hurling into space? He climbed into the great chair and made himself as comfortable as he could. The microphone, already live, was waiting for him. Something that was the equivalent of a TV camera must be watching, but he could not locate it. Beyond the desk and his meaningless instrument panels, the wide windows looked out into the starry night, across the valley sleeping beneath a gibbous moon, and to the distant range of mountains. A river wound along the valley, glittering here and there as the moonlight struck some patch of troubled water. It was all so peaceful. It might have been thus at man's birth, as it was now at his ending. Out there, across unknown millions of kilometers of space, Karelin would be waiting. It was strange to think that the ship of the overlords was racing away from Earth almost as swiftly as his signal could speed after it. Almost, but not quite. It would be a long chase, but his words would catch the supervisor, and he would have repaid the debt he owed. How much of this, Jan wondered, had Karelin planned, and how much was masterful improvisation? Had the supervisor deliberately let him escape into space almost a century ago, so that he could return to play the role he was fulfilling now? No, that seemed too fantastic. But Jan was certain now that Karelin was involved in some vast and complicated plot. Even while he served it, he was studying the overmind with all the instruments at his command. That Jan could add to that knowledge by what he was doing now seemed hard to believe. Tell us what you see, Rashaverak had said. The picture that reaches your eyes will be duplicated by our cameras, but the message that enters your brain may be very different, and it could tell us a great deal. Well, he would do his best. Still nothing to report, he began. A few minutes ago I saw the trail of your ship disappear in the sky. The moon is just past full, and almost half its familiar side has now turned away from Earth, but I suppose you already know that. There have been 3 slight quakes in the last hour, he continued. Their control of Earth's spin must be marvelous, but not quite perfect. You know now, Karelin, I'm going to find it very hard to say anything your instruments haven't already told you. It might have helped if you give me some idea of what to expect and warn me how long I have to wait. If nothing happens, I'll report again in 6 hours, as we arranged. Hello. They must have been waiting for you to leave. Something's starting to happen. The stars are becoming dimmer. It's as if a great cloud is coming up, very swiftly, over all the sky. But it isn't really a cloud. It seems to have some kind of structure. I can glimpse a hazy network of lines and bands that keep changing their positions. It's almost as if the stars are tangled in a ghostly spider's web. The whole network is beginning to glow, to pulse with light, exactly as if it were alive. And I suppose it is. Or is it something as much beyond life as that is above the inorganic world? The glow seems to be shifting to one part of the sky. Wait a minute while I move round to the other window. Yes, I might have guessed. There's a great burning column, like a tree of fire, reaching above the western horizon. It's a long way off, right round the world. I know where it springs from. They're on the way at last, to become part of the overmind. Their probation is ended. They're leaving the last remnants of matter behind. As that fire spreads upwards from the earth, I can see the network becoming firmer and less misty. In places it seems almost solid, yet the stars are still shining faintly through it. I just realized it's not exactly the same, but the thing I saw shooting up above your world, Karelin, was very much like this. Was that part of the overmind? I suppose you hid the truth from me so that I would have no preconceived ideas. so that I be an unbiased observer. I wish I knew what your cameras were showing you now, to compare it with what my mind imagines I'm seeing. Is this how it talks to you, Corallin, in colors and shapes like these? I remember the control screens on your ship and the patterns that went across them, speaking to you in some visual language which your eyes could read. Now it looks exactly like the curtains of the aurora, dancing and flickering across the stars. Why, that's what it really is, I'm sure, a great auroral storm. The whole landscape is lit up. It's brighter than day. Reds and golds and greens are chasing each other across the sky. Oh, it's beyond words. It doesn't seem fair that I'm the only one to see it. I never thought its colors. The storm's dying down, but the great misty network is still there. I think that aurora was only a byproduct of whatever energy has been released up there on the frontier of space. Just a minute. I've noticed something else. My weight's decreasing. What does that mean? I've dropped a pencil. It's falling slowly. Something's happening to gravity. There's a great wind coming up. I can see the trees tossing their branches down there in the valley. Of course, the atmosphere is escaping. Sticks and stones are rising into the sky, almost as if the earth itself is trying to follow them out into space. There's a great cloud of dust whipped up by the gale. It's becoming hard to see. Perhaps it will clear in a moment, and I'll be able to find out what's happening. Yes, that's better. Everything movable has been stripped away. The dust clouds have vanished. I wonder how long this building will stand. And it's getting hard to breathe. I must try to talk more slowly. I can see clearly again. That great burning column is still there, but it's constricting, narrowing. It looks like the funnel of a tornado, about to retract into the clouds. And, oh, this is hard to describe, but just then I felt a great wave of emotion sweep over me. It wasn't joy or sorrow. It was a sense of fulfillment, achievement. Did I imagine it? Or did it come from outside? I don't know. And now, this can't all be imagination. The world feels empty, utterly empty. It's like listening to a radio set that's suddenly gone dead. And the sky is clear again. The misty web is gone. What world will it go to next, Corallin? And will you be there to serve it still? Strange. Everything around me is unaltered. I don't know why, but somehow I'd thought that... Jan stopped. For a moment he struggled for words, then closed his eyes in an effort to regain control. There was no room for fear or panic now. He had a duty to perform, a duty to man and a duty to Corallin. Slowly at first, like a man awakening from a dream, he began to speak. The buildings around me, the ground, the mountains, everything's like glass. I can see through it. Earth's dissolving. My weight is almost gone. You were right. They finished playing with their toys. It's only a few seconds away. There go the mountains, like wisps of smoke. Goodbye, Corallin, Rashabarak. I am sorry for you. Though I cannot understand it, I've seen what my race became. Everything we ever achieved has gone up there into the stars. Perhaps that's what the old religions were trying to say. But they got it all wrong. They thought mankind was important. Yet we're only one race in, do you know how many? Yet now we've become something that you could never be. There goes the river. No change in the sky, though. I can hardly breathe. Strange to see the moon still shining up there. I'm glad they left it, but it will be lonely now. The light from beneath me, inside the earth, shining upward, through the rocks, the ground, everything, going brighter, brighter, blinding. In a soundless concussion of light, Earth's core gave up its hoarded energies. For a little while, gravitational waves crossed and recrossed the solar system, disturbing ever so slightly the orbits of the planets. Then the sun's remaining children pursued their ancient paths once more, as corks floating on a placid lake ride out the tiny ripples set in motion by a falling stone. There was nothing left of Earth. They had leached away the last atoms of its substance. It had nourished them through the fierce moments of their inconceivable metamorphosis, as the food stored in a grain of wheat feeds the infant plant when it climbs towards the sun. 6,000 million kilometers beyond the orbit of Pluto, Karelin sat before a suddenly darkened screen. The record was complete. The mission ended. He was homeward bound for the world he had left so long ago. The weight of centuries was upon him, and a sadness that no logic could dispel. He did not mourn for man. His sorrow was for his own race, forever barred from greatness by forces it could not overcome. For all their achievements, thought Karelin, for all their mastery of the physical universe, his people were no better than a tribe that had passed its whole existence upon some flat and dusty plain. Far off were the mountains where power and beauty dwelt, where the thunder sported above the glaciers and the air was clear and keen. There the sun still walked, transfiguring the peaks with glory, when all the land below was wrapped in darkness. And they could only watch and wonder. They could never scale those heights. Yet Karelin knew they would hold fast until the end. They would await without despair whatever destiny was theirs. They would serve the Overmind because they had no choice, but even in that service they would not lose their souls. The great control screen flared for a moment with somber, ruby light. Without conscious effort, Karelin read the message of its changing patterns. The ship was leaving the frontiers of the solar system. The energies that powered the star drive were ebbing fast, but they had done their work. Karelin raised his hand, and the picture changed once more. A single brilliant star glowed in the center of the screen. No one could have told from this distance that the sun had ever possessed planets, or that one of them had now been lost. For a long time, Karelin stared back across that swiftly widening gulf, while many memories raced through his vast and labyrinthine mind. In silent farewell, he saluted the men he had known, whether they had hindered or helped him in his purpose. No one dared disturb him or interrupt his thoughts, and presently he turned his back upon the dwindling sun.